Welcome back to Classic Car Restoration. One of the most expensive parts of any restoration is the paint job. Now, if you've got a car that has a bad paint job, you're going to be faced with the task of removing the paint and replacing it, which can cost well over $10,000 in today's world. But luckily, our classic 65 Mustang Fastback has a nice paint job, but we can do better through some color sanding and buffing. Here to help us do that is Kevin Tetz from Paint Education.
Steve, the car looks great, man.
Now, a question I have for you before we get to that is, when you have an older car, how do you know when to draw the line between a complete respray and color sanding and buffing the car to bring it back?
There's a couple places to look. The first place is by your trim. If you see signs of paint flaking around your trim in a couple of different places on the car, that's a sign of bad adhesion from your paint job. We see none of this on this Mustang. And also, around the cracks of your panels, if you have bad adhesion there or signs of shrinking or checking or anything like that, this car looks fantastic. I think it's going to be a good template.
After wiping the car down to remove dust that would scratch the surface, Kevin shows me the basics of color sanding. Color sanding is a process that removes the blemishes on the top layer of paint so the clean surface color can be buffed out. It's similar to having your teeth cleaned at the dentist. The first step is a light sanding with ultrafine sandpaper. Then the finish is simply buffed out to produce a mirror-like shine.
We're going to hand sand our surface to keep it nice and safe. We're going to be using 2500 grit paper, which is really ultra fine. It's not going to take much surface off.
To keep the sanding pressure even, Kevin wraps the sandpaper around a flexible sanding pad.
And now I have a flat surface in which to sand, and it's going to be consistent. That's the key, consistency.
The first step is to spray the surface with a soapy water solution, which lubricates the surface to prevent any scratches. Then Kevin uses the fine sanding pad to lightly scuff the top layer of paint, which is actually the clear coat finish on our particular car.
And although it looks like I'm covering a lot of ground fast, I'm really using a soft touch.
It is important to respray the surface with water to lubricate it and prevent a dry, rough sand. Now, how do you know when to stop?
Well, you want to monitor your progress, but obviously you can't see anything with the water on there. This water blade works fantastic for seeing exactly where you've sanded, and it shows you immediately. The dull surface, that's where you've sanded. Shiny, sandpaper hasn't touched.
Kevin continues the color sanding process, adding soapy water as needed and checking his progress as he goes.
Okay, that's all I wanted to do with that panel. I just want to knock the top off and give myself some buffing room. That's really going to pop.
I got to say, it does look a little scary. I'm like, where did our shine go?
I know.
But
it's
we're only
intimidating.
halfway there, right?
We're halfway there. This is half of the process, and it looks scarier than it is, so don't sweat it. All right, we're going to be using a compound. Now, sometimes there's a single compound for each step. This compound covers all three steps. You use one compound and three different pads, the first of which is a wool pad. Now, I'm using an electric buffer. I prefer an electric buffer as opposed to an air buffer. It has more torque at a low speed. This is variable speed. It'll go all the way up to 3,000 RPM, which can be very dangerous on a painted surface, especially a freshly painted surface. It can literally roll that paint up. You don't want that. So I recommend, when I tell people how to do this, that we start at the lowest possible speed, which on this particular buffer is about 700 RPM.
Kevin applies a small amount of buffing compound to the paint surface and sprays both the area and the buffing pad with regular water to prevent dry buffing. He spreads the compound around and slowly starts buffing. The trick is to keep the buffer moving and let the weight of the buffer do the work.
I'm letting the buffer skate on the surface. I don't want to manufacture the shine. I want to let the compound create the shine. And there's a big difference. You don't want to bear down into it because, quite frankly, you just don't need to.
After a few more passes with the wool buffer, Kevin changes the pad for the second stage of buffing. He repeats the buffing procedure, keeping the buffer moving across the surface. This second stage takes less time than the first, more aggressive buffing.
I hand buff again with my microfiber, and I'm ready for the next step.
The final stage is an ultra-soft pad that brings the surface to a brilliant glossy shine. It only takes a few minutes to get fantastic results.
Look at that. It looks awesome. You can clearly see where we stopped and started. That's shiny, it's red, but you can see where the orange peel ends and this brilliant gloss begins.
I got to say, Kevin, you're a magician. You know, we've probably saved thousands of dollars by finessing our existing paint with color sanding and some careful buffing. We're not quite finished yet. It'll take some time to sand and buff the rest of the car. And when we're done, we'll take our polished beauty out and show it off at a Mustang Club gathering. We'll also see some cool tricks that other Mustangers are doing with their cars.
This badging, by the way, is from the '67 Mustang.
Stick around.